Welcome to the ship editor. One of the first things you want to note right away are these arrows. These arrows point forwards on your ship. You cannot rotate your ship after the fact. Learn from our mistakes. Always, the very first thing you should always do is stick a block down, switch over, kick a cockpit, and stick a cockpit on so that you know which way is forward. Otherwise, you'll find out 20 minutes from now that it's backwards. Or if you're really unlucky, you'll not notice for a couple hours from now, and then you realize the ship is backwards. And no, there's no way to fix it. You have to start over. So, that's always the first thing you should do. But let's go back over to the first edit mode, and we'll get started with building a ship. So there are several modes in the editor, and we're just going to go through them in sequence. We've got the room edit mode, the prop edit mode, where you add cockpits, devices, and of course just plain old decorations like this lovely potted palm. Then you have the exterior edit mode, which is the exterior of your ship, of course. And then you have the group edit mode. It's labeled power group edit mode, but it involves all three group types. You have power groups, life support, and heating and cooling groups, which there's really no reason to mess with that except for very specific edge cases, but it's here. And of course the weapon groups, and we'll get back to all of that. The final mode is device edit mode, and this allows you to select devices and set specific settings on them. And again, we'll get back to that later. And last, of course, there's also the paint mode where you can paint the interior of your ships. But right now, we're going to go back to the room edit mode. So what we're going to do here is we're going to try and design a small fighter, or perhaps more likely we're going to try and design a small miner with weapons capabilities such that it would be a good starter ship. So the first thing to think about when you're building your first ship is like, what is it going to be for? And so it's going to be, in this case, we're going to build a miner. So we want to make sure we have enough room on the ship for the extractor, a refinery, generators for power, so forth. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start making the first room here. And you edit rooms in the room edit mode, and this makes the actual space where you can play the tile. So there's a big old space here, and then we can right click and delete parts of it, including parts we didn't mean to delete. Let's put one of these cockpits on. One thing you'll run into is when you'll see how it says in right here, because it won't automatically, it needs to have another room tile here, but it won't automatically place it. This is helpful if you want to make sure you don't accidentally create room tiles where you don't want them to be, especially this is more important later on. But early on in your ship design, you may want to turn lock room creation off, and that allows you to place blocks, and they will automatically expand out the needed blocks that they need. So we've got here the initial room, and it's only one tile high, and the extractor at minimum is 2 tiles high. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit page down, and page up and page down, and that changes the level that you're working on. So we're going to hit page down and add another room level. So now this room is 2 tiles high, and we're going to switch over to prop edit mode, resources, and there's the extractor. We'll select it, put it down, and as you can see, we now have an extractor in our ship. So that's the bare basics of building a ship. Now, there's all kinds of other things we're going to get into here, and we're going to start now, but we're going to delete this, and we're going to try and lay this out a little bit better. So we're going to make this a little bigger, and then we're going to divide it into rooms. So we're going to add another room here, You hit the plus symbol here. Again, this is in the first edit mode. Press F1 to switch to room edit mode. We're going to hit plus, and now we're going to add another room. You can see they're different. Dividing things into rooms is important for several reasons. If you divide it into rooms, it optimizes the ship, so the ship runs a little better, especially with a slower PC. Dividing into rooms helps you control against fires, helps you control against device damage. When you have automation and other things going and so forth, having multiple rooms affects, makes it easier to locate things because stuff is always labeled by what room it is in. So if your entire ship is one big room, it's much harder to find specific things. So we're going to make these two pods here. We're going to actually hit plus again, and this shows another cool thing you can do. We've got these two rooms here, and these two are actually the same room. We want them to be two separate rooms. So I've created another room, and we'll just drag over this. And now, each one is its own room. And more importantly, you can do cool things like this. We can put this extractor in here, and say we want this extractor to be in its own room. So we can hit plus on another room, and drag this over, and again, and now the extractor is in its room and is carried over. And this applies to all the devices, all the props that are in the room. So you can always, at any time, rework your ship to have additional rooms without needing to completely delete parts of your ship. We've got these two little wings here. We've got the mining part of the ship. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try and start setting this ship up. Switch over to F2, and we're putting an extractor in. And how many extractors you want to put in also is up to you. I always like to put in at least 2, so in case what happens a lot is you'll be mining, and so you'll see another asteroid flying by, and so maybe you have 2 extractors in to grab those other resources. You want to make sure when you place a device that you can have access to it. So for example, if I put this extractor like this, it is now really difficult to access this extractor in order to control it in game because the terminal is up against the wall. So we've got these both rotated so that you can access the stairs and access the controls. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to move, we're going to delete these and move them back slightly. Oh. Interesting. So there are our 2 extractors, and we'll put some refineries on this ship as well. And so there's 2 kinds, and the refineries are how you turn resources you collect into metals. So you have to collect the ore with these and turn them into metals with the refinery. There's 2 kinds of refineries. You have the large refinery and the small refinery. And the main thing is that the large refinery is faster and slightly more efficient than the small refinery in terms of how much power it requires. But other than that, there's not really any difference between the 2 besides their size. Anything you can create in the large refinery, you can create just as well in the small refinery. And also, the large refinery is a tier 1. You can see by the colors, the color on the prop tells you what tier it is. So white is tier 0, green is tier 1, blue is tier 2, and pink is tier 3. And that's the tier of resources that you need. You can see, if you look in the top right corner, that we have iron, copper, silicon, and steel needed for the large refinery. And silicon is a T1 resource. So when you just start out, you won't have access to silicon. You have to travel to other star systems to get it. So for your first ship, you don't want to have any props in the ship that require anything in different colors. You can see because we have this T1 prop on here, this ship design is now costing a T1 resource, and so we won't be able to build it right away. So we'll remove this, and now you can see the only resources that are required excuse me, are tier 0 resources. So we're going to put, what we're actually going to do is we're going to put another refinery in here. We're going to rearrange this a bit, and then what we'll do is we'll put a cargo teleporter here. So we're getting the cargo off the ship. And now this is the beginning of our mining chamber. And there's the cockpit up there, so we'll put some stairs leading up to the cockpit so that you can get from the cockpit down to your mining center. We'll put some walkways. Walkways allow you to have high areas, rooms you walk to without needing to have it to be in a separate room. So we'll put those there. And we'll put some extra ones here so we can put other things up there. And then we'll also put in a walkway going all the way to here. It stretches out, and this allows us to get to this extra wing section. This part right here, that's where the large refinery was. So we just delete that as the large refinery is gone, so we don't need the room to be that high at this point. And what we'll also do is we'll put a separate ladder up against the thing here so you can get up to it from there. We're going to delete this and we can replace the walkway. As you can see, there's a lot of ways you can do to lay out the ship and you can make it look much nicer than I'm making it look right now. But we're just showing you all the basics, and you can spend the time and, you know, carefully orienting the paths, choosing the kind of walls you want. There's all kinds of fences you can put in, all kinds of things you can make the ship look nicer. It's worth noting that the decorations do add a little bit of weight and a little bit of extra resource cost to your ship. So if you want your ship just to be as cheap as possible, as fast as possible, you may want to skip out on these in some of your earlier ships. But, so we've done all that. We're going to delete this back part here. And so there's the ship. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put some place to put the resources that we mine on the ship. So there's a few different places you can store code. You can store them on pads inside the ship, like so, and just put the resources directly on those pads. But if you want a more efficient way to store your resources, you can use the cargo pods. And there's a few different kinds, different sizes. We're going to put a couple of the round, small ones. Put them up here. And you may be thinking, well, this is a terribly designed ship because you have to walk up the stairs. And yes, but we can also use the cargo teleporter to teleport the resources directly into these pods. So that's why the cargo teleporter is down there. So now I've got the basic mining set up, all things, but now we need power for our ship. And this is one of the more important things, is you need to have enough power generation. And we're going to use some hydrogen generators here in order to power everything on your ship. And you need fuel storage, so we're going to put a hydrogen tank here in order for you to put fuel in for your tanks. We're going to put one here as well. So we have two. We're going to put in a teleporter, because you have to have a teleporter to get on and off your ship. And we're going to put a transponder on the ship. Transponder allows you to broadcast your location to other players. So normally you want this turned off, but if you're stuck or stranded, need someone to help you, you can turn that on and see if somebody can come deliver you some fuel or something. We'll put a molecular assembler on the ship. This allows you to respawn on your ship if you die, so that can be helpful. And we'll put a terminal on the ship right here. This allows you to see information about your ship and the things around your ship. You can see a lot of the information that's in the terminal in your grip, but some information you can only access from a terminal. So you always want to have at least one terminal on your ship. Alright, so that's all the basic devices. What we want to do now is learn a little bit more about power. So for power, you always want to have at least one or two power cells, because these act as like capacitors, quick bursts of energy, which is useful when you're warping. So you want to have a couple of those. But you don't want to have a whole bunch because they weigh down your ship and you don't really need that many. And the same goes for batteries. If you can put them on as like emergency power supplies, but they tend to suck a lot of your fuel up, and you can't turn power back into hydrogen fuel. So you generally don't want batteries on your first hydrogen-powered ship. But how can we know how much power we need? And so that's where the group edit mode, F4, and we can see now all these numbers here and all the power generating and power consuming devices on our ship. So we can see that the power generation is 900 because we have 6 of the small hydrogen gens. Each one of these puts out 150 power per tick. There are 20 ticks per second. Ticks are how Interstellar measures time. So that means that each one of these puts out 150 power per tick, and the ship produces 900 power. And then it says the drain is 202. Which is a little bit misleading for 2 reasons. First, this drain assumes that every single device on your ship is draining as much power as it possibly can at the same time. And that hardly ever happens. It's very rare. It's basically impossible that to happen unless you're like intentionally trying to turn all your devices on at once. Most of the time, your devices aren't drawing power because they're not in use, and so this number is not entirely accurate. What is a more important number to pay attention to is this number up here. This is how much power it takes for your ship to warp. So it takes 621 power per tick to warp, and that's empty. So if you get some cargo on your ship, then your ship can't warp anymore because it's too heavy. It doesn't have enough power generation. So right now, we can produce 900, and it costs 621. So what we'll do is we'll go back and we'll put some hydrogen gens here and there, and then we'll put one there, one there, one there. If we go back to the power group mode again, you can see we'll actually delete a couple of these. And power, now you can see the power division is 750, but this is still the same. So you want to, let's get these in here, and we can see, and now that this generation cost is 708, but generation is 1050, and the mass will almost certainly go up just as we add more stuff to the ship, and as you add cargo to your ships. This is probably a good number of generators. So the next thing you want to put in is you want to put in some shields and armor generators. Now, Interstellar Rift has a very weird system for determining the health of your ship. It uses armor generators. It's a little bit of a complicated and confusing system. The main thing to keep in mind is that your ship really doesn't have any health unless you have an armor generator. And armor generators and weapons and shields all take CPU points. So as a tier 1 ship, you also probably want to have one of these so you can have a little more armor. So we'll stick one of these down here. And so if you go, so what we'll do now, switch back to the weapons mode, you can see that this ship has 400 CPU points available to it. Now, that's because this is on my server, which has a modified CPU and so on and so forth. So that's a little more than you'll have in vanilla. I think in vanilla you just have 200 or possibly 300, but you'll see that in the editor how much you have available based on your server there. So this ship has 400 CPU available. We go to weapons, we can see that an armor generator costs T1, costs 30. Again, that's because this is modified, so it costs a little more than one on your server. We'll put a couple of these in, and we'll put in just one shield generator. And we're only going to put one in because it does cost power to run these. And so armor generators, they don't cost any power to run, they just take so much mass. So we'll put another one of those in. This isn't going to be a fighting ship, this is going to be a bare minimum mining ship. So we have all that in. And the next thing we want to put in is we want to put in a couple of ammo loaders in order to load ammo for the ship, because we're going to put some guns on it just so you can fight off a diffuse skrill early on. So that's the basics of our ship's insides done. So we're going to hit F4, and you see the groups again. You can have multiple power groups, and this is something you really don't want to have for most of your ships. Power groups are kind of a specialized thing, so you want to make sure you don't split your devices up into multiple power groups because it can mess with your ship. If you download a ship from the workshop, you see it's got lots of power groups. It's probably not a good ship. You may want to try building a ship of your own or getting a different ship. But for right now, we're going over to weapon groups. And you can see that we have 117 CPU used out of 400 available. And again, those numbers will be different for your configuration. But what we're going to do right now is hit F3, and there's our exterior ship. So obviously it looks a bit ugly, but you can always work on this, and you can do all kinds of neat things for getting the exterior of your ship looking the way you want it. So we're going to put a couple of autocannons. We're going to do 6 of them. And we're also going to put a couple on the side to make it easier to shoot enemies that are on the side of us. As we go back to F4, you can see now that we have the weapons and this all in the same group, and this is using about half of our available CPU. So you don't need to necessarily use all of your CPU, but generally speaking, you probably want to. You can always just put in another armor generator if you have leftover CPU points. So that's all that. Now the next thing we need to work on is our ship's ability to move. So we need some engines. And you can do fun things with the editor. You can do things like that. There's all kinds of neat things you can do to make your ship look a little more interesting. All kinds of neat blocks, neat tricks. What I always like to do is like to look at workshop ships on the Steam Workshop and see what things other people have come up with. The exterior mode also has a symmetry mode where you can hit P and then use the brackets to move it so it's in the middle of your ship. And then you can have the ship mirror what you're doing on both sides, which is very helpful. But you can do all kinds of neat things to come up with your own unique look. So there's the ship, and you can see now with those engines we've put on, the max speed is 137. That's pretty slow, so we'll put a few more on. Alright, up to 224. That's pretty good. And again, how fast your ship is determined based on its mass and its engines. So if you have lots of cargo on your ship, it will slow down a bit. Now, we're not done yet because we also need maneuvering thrusters. If you don't have these, your ship can't turn any, so you'll make sure you have these. And again, this thing right here shows you how fast you can turn. You, generally speaking, want to aim for a turn rate of 0.1. That's where most people prefer it. But you may be somebody who likes your ship to turn a little slower or turn a little faster. And so you can always remove and play with that and see which turn rate works best for you. Again, how heavy your ship is determines the turn rate. So this ship's turn rate now is 1.24, but if I get it really loaded down with lots of cargo, maybe your turn rate will go down a little bit. So it's all things to keep in mind. And there are various ways to control the turn rate of your ship in-game with power groups and turning engines on and off, but that's none of those things you don't need to worry about. So now we've got a basic ship here, and you want to always check, now that we've added all this stuff, you can see now, if we go back to power, we can see that it can produce 1,050, and has a warp train cost of 844. But now we have, in addition to now for warp, you have to remember that we also have that shield generator. And the shield generator has a drain of 150. So if you want your shields to stay up while you're in warp, you need to have your warp cost plus the cost of your shields and any other always-on devices. But that's pretty much the basics of the editor right there. Lots of things you can do. You've got solar panels to get you a little bit of free power. It's always a good idea to have a couple of solar panels so you can like open doors and things on your new ship. Speaking of doors, I forgot we need to put doors here so we can access these hangar bays. Yeah, you want to have a little bit of solar panels so you can open doors on your ship when you first get to it, so you can get to your hydrogen tanks and put fuel in the tanks and so forth. But that is the basics of the editor. And there's all kinds of neat things you'll learn about. There's more advanced devices. There's all kinds of fun things. There's weapons like the heavy railgun, which as you can see is almost as big as half of our ship here. It's a heavy-duty T3 device that does a huge amount of damage. There's all kinds of interesting things you'll learn about as you play the game more, but that's the basics of the editor. If you have questions about this, you can ask me on the Discord, either IsR Rift or Event Horizon Discord. Links for both of those are in the description.